It was a quiet morning at the Wildlife Rescue Center, the kind of morning where everything felt still, as if nature itself were holding its breath. The birds were quiet, the leaves barely rustling in the breeze. Then, the calm was shattered by a noise that made the caretakers freeze. "Is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trailing off that a shadow loomed at the edge of the enclosure. At first, the staff thought it was a wild animal passing by. But then, the unmistakable figure of a bear stepped into view. It was him, their bear, the one they had released into the wild just weeks ago. "He's back." Jason, another caretaker, breathed out in disbelief. The bear, the smallest and most timid of the creatures they had saved, had returned. After being set free, after being given the chance to roam wild and free, he had come back to the very place he had once known as home. This wasn't just any bear. It was a bear that had been found injured and near death just months ago in a remote part of the forest. Alone, abandoned, its small body bruised and scarred, it had been brought to the Wildlife Rescue Center with little hope. But Sarah, Jason, and the team had worked tirelessly to nurse it back to health. They'd watched it grow stronger every day. At first, it had been a struggle just to get him to eat, to drink. But over time, he learned to trust again. He came to see Sarah as his mother figure, his protector. Jason had spent hours with him, teaching him how to forage and roam, preparing him for a life in the wild. The decision to release him into the wild had been both a triumph and a heartbreak. They had done everything they could to give him a second chance. But now, standing at the edge of the enclosure, watching the bear's massive form in the distance, Sarah felt her heart twist in a way she hadn't anticipated. The bear hesitated just outside the gates. He stood tall, sniffing the air, his massive frame casting a shadow over the grass. His fur, once matted and disheveled, now looked healthy, shining in the sunlight. "Is he coming back in?" Jason asked, his voice trembling with a mix of confusion and concern. "Why?" The bear's eyes met theirs. He wasn't the same small, frightened creature they had first encountered. He was strong now, independent, or so they thought. But instead of running off into the wild, as they expected, the bear took a few cautious steps closer to the enclosure. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though he were choosing that. As Sarah watched, a sinking feeling crept into her stomach. Why would he come back? Why would he choose the safety of the enclosure over the vast, untamed wilderness? She stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Maybe he's confused," she whispered. But deep down, she knew something was different. The bear wasn't confused. He was choosing, and that choice? It was something none of them had expected. The bear, whom Sarah and Jason had lovingly called Theo, had arrived at the center in a state of shock. Barely a year old, he had been found near death, malnourished, dehydrated, and covered in cuts from a recent encounter with hunters' traps. It was a miracle that he had survived at all. At first, Theo had been distant and wary, not trusting anyone, not even the humans who had brought him food and care. But slowly, over the course of several weeks, Sarah had watched him soften. That she'd fed him, bathed him, and watched as his strength returned. There were moments when he would let her get close, when his dark eyes would meet hers, and she could swear there was something more than animal instinct there. It was a bond, one forged in the quiet hours of care, patience, and unwavering devotion. Jason, too, had spent countless hours teaching Theo how to navigate the woods, how to fish, how to forage. It wasn't just about survival. It was about reintroducing him to his natural habitat, giving him the skills to live on his own. It had been one of the hardest decisions they'd ever had to make. Letting go of a creature they had come to love, to trust, felt almost impossible. But they knew Theo needed to be free. They had done their part. It was time for him to live the life he was meant to. The day of the release was bittersweet. They had driven Theo into the forest, far from the center, to a secluded area where he would have room to roam and thrive. It was an emotional day for Sarah and Jason. They knew it was the right choice, but as they opened the cage, part of them was terrified. What if he wasn't ready? What if he didn't know how to survive? What if the wild proved to be too much for him? But as Theo stepped out of the cage, his large paws sinking into the soft earth of the forest, Sarah saw something in his eyes: freedom. He hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air, taking in the world that was waiting for him. Then, With one final look at Sarah and Jason, he turned and lumbered into the forest that it was over. The bear was free, and they had done everything they could to help him get there. As they drove back to the center, the silence in the car felt heavy. Neither Sarah nor Jason said anything, each lost in their own thoughts. They had given Theo his chance, but the unknowns of the wild were overwhelming. "I hope he makes it," Jason said quietly, breaking the silence. "I hope he finds a place out there, where he belongs." Sarah nodded, her eyes focused on the road ahead. Though her mind was with Theo, deep in the forest, they couldn't have known that this was just the beginning of the story. For the first few days, they heard nothing. No signs of Theo, no sightings, just silence. They had done everything they could to prepare him for life in the wild. But Sarah couldn't shake the fear that something had gone wrong. Then, one morning, they received a call. A sighting. Theo was spotted at the edge of the forest, near the road. Jason and Sarah rushed to the location. Their hearts raced. Was he okay? Was he adapting to the wild? Or had something gone wrong? When they reached the spot, they saw him, but not how they'd expected. Theo was standing at the edge of the forest, staring at the enclosure from a distance. He wasn't running away, exploring, or hunting. He was just standing there, his large eyes fixed on the familiar space that had once been his home. It wasn't long before the bear made his way back to the center, walking slowly, his movements deliberate. When he reached the gate of the enclosure, he paused. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Theo was back. But why? Jason stepped forward cautiously. "Theo," he called softly. The bear didn't respond, but his gaze never left them. There was no aggression, no wild behavior. It was as if he were asking permission to come home. The realization hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. The bear they had released, the one they had worked so hard to prepare for freedom, had chosen to return. The caretakers stood around, unsure of what to do. Was this normal? Did it mean something was wrong? They had done everything to prepare him. The wilderness was supposed to be his home now. Yet, here he was, standing at the gate, a part of him still wanting the safety and familiarity of the enclosure. "It doesn't make sense," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "He should be out there free." But Theo didn't seem to want to leave. He took a few tentative steps forward, pressing his nose against the bars. His eyes locked onto Sarah's. Maybe he's not ready for the wild," Jason said, quietly, almost as if trying to make sense of it. The question hung in the air. Could it be that Theo preferred the safety of the enclosure, the routine, the comfort, and the care over the wild, untamed freedom? Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Theo's return. She watched him from a distance, sitting in his favorite corner of the enclosure, just watching the trees sway. There was an odd sense of calm in him now, a contentment that hadn't been there before. Jason had gone to get food for him, but Sarah stayed behind. "What if we made a mistake?" she asked quietly, the question lingering in her mind. Jason shook his head. "No, we did what was best for him. He needed a chance." But deep inside, Sarah wasn't so sure. Maybe, in trying to give Theo freedom, they had overlooked something. Maybe the world outside wasn't where he felt safe. As the days passed, Theo stayed close. He wandered around the enclosure, but never far from the comfort of the walls. He would look at the trees, at the wild forest beyond, but he never ventured out. His choice was clear. The wild was too much for him. He preferred the safety of his former home. Sarah watched as he laid down in the corner, his massive body stretched out in the sun. There was no need for him to leave. The care he received, the food, the safety, it was all here. The wild, it seemed, wasn't the paradise everyone imagined it to be. For Theo, it was overwhelming, lonely, and uncertain. Experts were consulted, and Sarah learned that Theo's choice was not entirely unexpected. Many animals raised in captivity, especially those who had been rescued at a young age, had difficulty adjusting to the wild. They could survive, yes, but they often lacked the mental and emotional fortitude to deal with the constant dangers and unpredictability of the wild. Theo may have felt more secure here, where he knew the boundaries. One expert explained. It wasn't about freedom in the traditional sense. For him, freedom came with safety. Sarah sat by the fence, watching Theo as he lazily stretched in the sun. She realized that for him, this was his freedom, not the wilderness, not the unknown. Here, in the familiar space where he had healed, He could finally live without fear. Perhaps the wild wasn't for everyone. And maybe, just maybe, this was where Theo truly belonged. Theo stayed in the enclosure, content and at peace. He would never again wander the wild as they had hoped. But here, with Sarah and Jason, he had everything he needed: comfort, care, and love. Maybe freedom is just what you make of it, Sarah thought, looking at Theo one last time. Theo's story became one of understanding, not disappointment. The team had given him the gift of survival, but the ultimate gift was his choice: to return to a place where he felt safe. As Sarah walked away, she realized that sometimes freedom isn't about where you are, it's about how you feel.